Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Pardon Our Promotion. I'm Lindsay. This is Scott.
Hey
Where's
guys.
Bob?
I don't know where Bob is.
Oh, we should have called him. We should have let him know.
Somewhere on the road.
Somewhere in the United States. So today we are going to talk about communication, the importance of it between departments in order to have a successful production, documentation, how, if you don't have good communication or documentation or processes, how we can improve them. So what does that look like to you as far as communication between one department in the organization to you, to the production team? How do we streamline it?
I mean, communication there's a lot of different places that we need communication. From a live production standpoint, let's talk about your in-event communications key. A lot of teams use radios, things like that, which is great, I think, for your venue, your operating staff, ushers, things like that. I prefer, the production is on its own communications platform, ClearCom, or we use Unity Intercom with our clients. Very similar, open channel communication. We can get multiple people talking at once if need be, but it's just a little bit of a more clear communication than radios. There's a lot of failure in radios and things like that. So, but it's key. It's the most important thing that we have equipment-wise in our show. I spare obviously the video board and that equipment, but communication, if we don't have that, no one really can keep themselves in check. No one can, talk about changes. No one can clarify things. And we're spread out sometimes. The producer's not always in the control room. Your show callers, could be dealing with something live. So you need to have instant access to all your production staff.
Yeah. Well, a lot of what we do is so fast-paced and very time-sensitive at times. So not being able to get in contact with one of your, whether that be your host or your producer or your video board operator, director, whatever that may be, sometimes can be detrimental to that moment in the show, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. And then, furthermore is separating those channels of communication. Who has, access, who you're communicating to, are your camera operators and your control room staff on a separate channel than your host or your promotion staff, and obviously, yes. And then, other communication within the organization leading up to a game, groups between, you and ticketing and partnerships, and making sure all your entitlements are executed properly and scheduled as they should be. So like that base kind of communication's huge, but sometimes lacking in most places.
Yeah, and I think we've seen kind of a lot of different teams, the way they organize that communication, and you can pretty quickly see successful and not successful versions of it. So as far as like communicating, between groups and nightly promos and what's going on that night, important sponsorship that needs to happen that night. What are those key factors, do you think, that need to be included, whether it be whatever type of documentation that whatever system they use, whether they use Google Docs or an Excel sheet or something like that? Like, what do you think those key things are that need to be included in that?
Well, I mean, as a producer, I need to know everything that's happening in that game because I'm the one that's scheduling it. I'm putting it on the game day documents. It's kind of up to me to ensure that the item is going to happen ultimately. So I need to know as much information as possible. So the communication, and I'm not talking verbal communication always, it can be share your spreadsheet with me, share your document that you use internally to track it so that I can pull the information out. Make sure to include bio information if it's a group that we need to include that for. And then, same thing for sponsorship. Not always the verbal communication, is just having access to an activation schedule that you've set up with them before the season starts, so that they can schedule it and you can see what they want, and that way you don't have to. You save time on meetings, you save time on making phone calls and things like that. So, I mean, those kind of factors leading up to the game obviously are required for you to put the game together, period. So you need to have those communication processes set up. And then it's, as far as those two departments are concerned, up until game day, they're just double checking your work as far as I'm concerned, making sure that you have all the information that they've put in that sheet or whatever communication, platform you use, that it's all in there, so that nothing's missed.
Yeah, and I think too, like, even though the front office is so small in most organizations, it's still like each department's kind of in their own little world, and they may assume, okay, food and beverage might assume, the production team knows that this is happening, or the sales, they think that they already know those things, but I think oftentimes they don't necessarily know what's going on. So it's useful not only for us as producers, but for just the whole front office and organization, game day staff, to kind of know what's going on a nightly basis, on a homestand basis. So I think that documentation definitely helps with that as well. So recently we had our entire communication system shut down for our live event I think it was only off for like a minute or two, but having the backup plan of what we're going to do whenever that does happen. And I think it differs between like what system that you do use, but what happens if you no longer can be in communication with anyone? Like, what is the backup plan? Do we have a backup plan? Can you plan for that?
Use hand signals. I don't know. I honestly don't know. If you don't have communication, it's really hard. And sometimes, you do deal with situations in a live production where you have technical issues where your communication system does go down, and you realize just how hard it is to produce a show without being able to communicate. And it's obviously an emergency situation where your resource goes to trying to get that system back up. Mm-hmm. But your backup is your documentation. So you better make sure that your documentation's right, that your game day docs are clear and effective, because really you want to set them up in the sense that they could be operated with no communication. Mm-hmm. So that's your backup, but get your system back up.
Right. That's number one priority, is get your system back up, but having the documentation back to where we began, like to a T, 100%, you can look at that and know exactly what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, how it's going to happen, where it's going to happen. So if that does fall through, then you're good to go. But I think when that happened with us, and one of our technical directors had he was like, just tell your camera operators that they just pretend like they're always live, they're always online. And I think just going with like, our communication's down, but we're not going to freak out, just staying calm and just remaining like in the moment and doing the things that you should be doing anyway, but just without that communication.
Yeah. And you always have pre-production too, to take that opportunity to communicate anything that is vital to the execution of the show, in the event that you can't communicate it live. Mm-hmm. So definitely.
Yeah, and I think we had a whole episode on meetings, pre-production, post-production, but I still just see it so often where teams don't have those meetings, and I just wanted to touch base on it again. Like, that's part of your communication. Those pre-production meetings, the post-production meetings, they're vital to the event itself. So. Yeah,
definitely. Well said.
All right, guys. That concludes this episode of Pardon Our Promotion. Let us know if you have a good system for communicating that we may not know about. As always, it's all about your fans.